So we've got a major development in one of the most important election law battles that's going on in the entire country, because this fight is now officially back in front of the United Supreme Court on an emergency basis. The Trump administration's DOJ also has now officially stepped in and is supporting Alabama's position. Now, at the same time, Justice Thomas has already taken action on Alabama's emergency application and ordered that the challengers need to file a response by June 1st, so next Monday, so the court can consider this issue on an emergency basis. So there's a lot now developing, a lot is at stake when it comes to the upcoming election, so let's break down what is now happening. I also want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Patriot Gold Group. If you've been watching the markets closely, you will know that something unusual is happening. Silver has surged to over 158% in 2025, and this move isn't over yet. It looks like the opening chapter is just happening right now. This is not the finale at all. Gold is up 60%, silver is up 150%, and that kind of move doesn't just happen by accident. Now, as a member of the Second Amendment community, this concept already makes sense to you. You believe in self-reliance, in not outsourcing your safety, and in being prepared before you're forced to actually react. Your finances deserve the same type of mindset that your self-defense also gets. That's why I work with Patriot Gold Group. They help Americans protect their savings with physical gold and silver, and these metals you can have delivered to you or held in a no-fee-for-life IRA. They specialize in rolling over IRAs and 401ks into real, tangible assets that you actually own. Now, this isn't about market panic or anything like that. It's about positioning yourself and putting yourself in the best position to defend your finances like you would defend your life. So if you're interested, check out Patriot Gold Group. You can mention Armed Scholar when you check out to get the best-in-class service from the Patriots that are focused on protecting your investments, or you can call 888-581-3830, and you can get also a free investment guide and see if you qualify for a no-fee-for-life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Now, if you've been following this case for a while, you will know that the Supreme Court recently issued a major 6-3 ruling in a case called Louisiana versus Calais. That decision significantly changed how federal courts are supposed to analyze Voting Rights Act Section 2 vote dilution claims in these types of cases. Now, among other things, the Supreme Court emphasized that lower courts must separate race from politics and must account for a state's legitimate political goals and traditional districting principles when evaluating congressional maps. Now, following that ruling by the Supreme Court, Alabama immediately asked the Supreme Court to revisit prior rulings that had blocked the state's 2023 congressional map, and the Supreme Court agreed to review that issue. Originally, the Supreme Court vacated the prior injunctions that were issued by the lower court and sent the case back down to the lower federal courts for reconsideration under the new Calais framework. That was a huge development because Alabama viewed the Supreme Court's action as confirmation that the lower court needed to take a fresh look at the case under these new standards. But when the case went back down to the 3-judge panel, when it went to that court, the judges once again ruled against Alabama. The lower court issued a new preliminary injunction blocking Alabama from using its 2023 congressional map and ordered the state to continue using the court-ordered special master map that was used during the 2024 election cycle and also recently during the 2026 primaries. The judges concluded that even after reconsidering this case in light of that new Supreme Court precedent, they still believe that Alabama's map likely involved intentional racial discrimination and unlawful vote dilution. The court also rejected Alabama's argument that the map was driven primarily by partisan political goals rather than race. So in short, the district court essentially said that that new Supreme Court precedent changed nothing about this ultimate conclusion of the case, and that immediately set up another showdown at the Supreme Court level. Alabama has quickly now officially returned to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, and they're asking for emergency relief. Specifically, Alabama wants the court to immediately block the lower court's injunction and allow the state of Alabama to use its 2023 congressional map during the upcoming election cycle. The state argues that the lower court effectively ignored the Supreme Court's instructions and simply reissued the same ruling that the Supreme Court had already vacated and remanded. The state argues that the 2023 map was based on traditional districting priorities and political objectives, including keeping the Gulf Coast counties together as a single community of interest, reunifying regions as much as possible, avoiding incumbent pairings in certain districts, and preserving Republican voting strength in a heavily Republican state. Alabama also argued that the district court failed to properly separate race from politics and essentially presumed discrimination because Alabama refused to draw another majority black district within the state. Now that this case is back in front of the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, there have been a lot of developments that have happened very quickly. The Trump DOJ has officially filed a brief supporting Alabama, and they're asking the Supreme Court to intervene in this case. The federal government argues that the lower court completely failed to show how the Supreme Court's new framework that they just issued in that 6-3 ruling does not impact this case. The DOJ says the district court failed to disentangle race from partisan politics, that they ignored Alabama's political goals, and improperly treated Alabama's refusal to create a second black majority district as evidence of racial discrimination. The federal government also argues that the district court violated the Supreme Court's Purcell Doctrine by changing election rules and congressional maps deep into the election cycle. And perhaps most notably here, the DOJ is now characterizing the current court-ordered congressional map as a judicially imposed race-based map that would not exist but for the lower court's intervention. That is a dramatic position that the federal government is now taking in this case and signals just how important this case it really is and why this is going to impact a lot of things nationally. But now we have another major development that happened recently in this case. Justice Clarence Thomas, who handles emergency applications arising from the 11th Circuit, has already acted on Alabama's emergency application. The court has ordered that the challengers here need to file a response by 4 p.m. on June 1st, so that is Monday. And while that may sound a little bit procedural, it's actually significant. It means that the application is actively moving through the emergency docket, and the Supreme Court did not simply just sit on this filing, they are going to review this issue. Once that response is filed, the Supreme Court could act very quickly. The court could deny relief, the court could issue an administrative stay. So one of the things they could do is just put a stay on that lower court ruling, for the meantime, while they review the broader issues in this case. But again, that would also affect the election that's going on in Alabama. The court could grant a stay pending appeal, or the court could just issue a broader ruling really quick, addressing how the recent Supreme Court precedent should actually have been applied by the lower court moving forward. But the key takeaway is that this fight is actively before the Supreme Court right now on an emergency basis. And one thing that people need to understand is that this case is no longer just about Alabama. This case is rapidly becoming one of the most important legal battles over the future of voting rights acts, those types of claims, race and politics in congressional redistricting, the authority of federal courts, and the ability of these states to pursue political objectives when drawing these types of district lines. The Supreme Court's new decision that they issued in Calais already reshaped this area of law, and now the Supreme Court justices may have to decide whether the lower courts are actually following that ruling. And the answer could affect redistricting litigation across the country for years to come. It could also affect the balance of powers in Congress going forward because Alabama's competing maps would lead to a very different political outcome. And again, this would not just impact Alabama. This could then be cited by other states who are dealing with their own issues when it comes to the elections. So that's the latest major update in the Alabama redistricting battle. The case is now officially back before the United States Supreme Court on an emergency basis after the lower court issued a ruling that once again blocked Alabama's 2023 congressional map. Alabama is asking the Supreme Court to immediately restore their 2023 map, which would favor Republicans, and the Trump administration's Department of Justice is now supporting Alabama's position and arguing that the lower court ignored Supreme Court precedent that they just issued. And with all of this, Justice Thomas has now ordered a response by the challengers, which will be due June 1st. And so we will find out very quickly how the Supreme Court wants to handle this issue. So this case is moving incredibly fast, and there is a very real possibility that we could see action from the Supreme Court just within days. So as soon as that happens, as we get more information, as this unravels more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.